Kingsbury can rewrite the narrative surrounding him and catapult the Arizona Cardinals offense in 2022. Plus, some Andy Isabella training camp notes.
You are Locked On Cardinals, your daily Arizona Cardinals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Locked On Cardinals, Alex Clancy live Tuesday edition. Follow me on Twitter at Clancy's Corner. Follow the podcast at Locked On AZ Cards. Thanks for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen each and every day, free and available on all platforms. Kliff Kingsbury under a microscope today. I'll talk about Andy Isabella a bit. I've been trying to find fun storylines out of camp, and there are two. We know that the cornerback room, as of right now, leaves a little bit to be desired, but that's okay. It seems like there's an emerging player who has caught the eye of not only the defense, but Kliff Kingsbury. And I am one who said that this guy wasn't going to cut it. And if I'm wrong, I'm happy that I'm going to be wrong. I'm going to talk about him a little bit later. I'm going to talk about Andy Isabella. Made waves, okay? It's made some waves. And it's not Andy Isabella as the player. It's Andy Isabella as a microcosm of something bigger. And I'm going to talk about that in the third segment. Kliff Kingsbury has the ability to completely change his narrative surrounding him, the Arizona Cardinals' efficiency, and hopefully in turn their win total and finishing a season like they haven't really been able to do the last two seasons. And there's a couple different ways that he's able to do this. One, he needs to take the leadership jump that Kyler Murray needs to take. And it's not necessarily being a leader or not being a leader, because it's not that cut and dry. But when things get tough, players, coaches aren't the ones you want calling the plays, calling the timeouts. You want the enforcer. And Kliff Kingsbury needs to add a little bit more enforcer into his coaching style. And we've seen it. You know, he's gone after refs at least early to middle of last season. So we're like, oh, that's a little new. That's a little more bravado than we've seen from old Kliffy baby. But I feel like from now through the end of the 2022 season, wherever that may end, we need to see a little bit more enforcer from Kliff Kingsbury. And I think it's going to bear fruits in myriad ways. One, it's going to add a little bit more gusto to this team when things aren't going well. Because by all accounts, Kliff Kingsbury is more of an easy breezy guy. You know, obviously he watches a lot of film. He takes his job very seriously. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just his laissez-faire. You take a picture of Kliff Kingsbury, he doesn't look like a Bill Belichick serious dude. You know, and obviously he's serious about his job and everything like that. But you need a little bit more oomph from Kliff to raise up this, you know, the urgency of this team, because it was severely lacking the second half of the last two seasons. Or the urgency wasn't parlaying into victories. And that's something that needs to change. So if Kliff Kingsbury wants to take his coaching style and in turn wins to the next level, that's something that I think he needs to add. Number two, I don't know if he needs to simplify or complicate what he is doing right now that's causing the false start penalties in inopportune times. That's something that needs to be history. And we saw it week 1 against Tennessee last year. They were up a whole bunch. Chandler Jones, well, it was early in the game. Chandler Jones strip sack. That drive, there was a penalty, a timeout, ended in a field goal. When the Cardinals 100% should have scored a touchdown on that drive. And you could say, sure, you know, it was week 1, getting the cobwebs off, absolutely. But through the history of him being the head coach, there have been times where the last thing that could happen would be an offensive penalty. And lo and behold, it was an offensive penalty pre-snap. And that's something that absolutely needs to be fixed, avoided, changed, improved upon. If Kliff Kingsbury wants to elevate this offense, elevate this team to replicate what they did last year and expound upon it. And before I get to the last one, like, I would want to play for Kliff Kingsbury. Like, none of this is about that. Like, this isn't a personal attack on who he is as a person, or how he carries himself, what he does, all that. Like, that's not what this is. I would love to play for Kliff. You kidding me? It seems fun, especially on offense. But there's a time for that, but there's more time for some of the things that he's not so proficient at through 3 years as a head coach in the NFL. And these are the things that I think could elevate him to become an absolute juggernaut strength of this organization, as opposed to a streaky three-point shooter, which is kind of what he is as a head coach. When he's great, man, there's nobody better. He's up there. But when he's shooting 2 for 13 from 3, it's like, maybe take 2 dribbles and take a 16-footer. Maybe get to the rim and go to the free throw line so you can get your momentum back. See the ball go through the basket. It's one or the other with him. And bridging the gap between those two sides is something that could pave the way for one of the better offensive minds we've seen in recent memory. But he's not there yet. We've seen flashes. We've seen a great movie trailer, but the full movie isn't always that great. Angst, a little bit more mean coach. Not always the player's coach, a little bit more mean coach. Plus, have to knock down the pre-snap penalties, especially in position where the Cardinals are going in for 6. We've seen it way, way more than we should have seen. Penalties kill regardless, but especially in a 3rd and 1 midfield false start, a 3rd and 1 false start. It's just like, man, it kills a potential drive. And then number 3, and this is something that could truly change. Like, his timeout calling needs an overhaul. And it sounds so dumb. You watch this team, you love this team. Thanks for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen. Okay? Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for being Cardinals fans. Kliff Kingsbury needs to work on his timeout usage. We see far too many him running down the sideline trying to call a timeout when either the play call was wrong or the play clock was running down. And sure, some of this is on Kyler Murray, absolutely. But with Kliff, it's just like, why are you calling a timeout there? Like, you want to alleviate from being down 4 with 1 timeout left in the 4th quarter because you had to burn 2 in the 3rd quarter on things that maybe didn't need to have a call, didn't even need to have a timeout called in specific situations. I just find that the Cardinals, with penalties and ill-used timeouts, put themselves in situations they don't necessarily need to be in. But putting a button on this, Kliff Kingsbury can definitely level up like Kyler Murray will level up in 2022. And if he does, you'll see him waltzing into that contract extension like, yeah, I deserve this. There's room there. We've seen flashes. We've seen the oh my God moments, just like I say with Kyler Murray and other players. But the potency of the oh my God moments need to become more and more prevalent if Kliff Kingsbury and the Arizona Cardinals offense, with the Arizona Cardinals as an entity, want to take that step forward, win a playoff game, and go deep into a playoffs in 2022. Alex Clancy, Locked On Cardinals. Thank you for hanging out. Thanks for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen each and every day. I'm going to dabble into some camp a little bit. Next segment, it's going to be good. Next, first, another thing that's good is Built Bar. If you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you are depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. It's true. Guess what? There's a new flavor. Cookie dough, covered in chocolate. Built Bar, they've done it again. Just another flavor. Cookie dough chunk puffs have a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. And of course, they're good for you. Okay, only 160 calories, 15 grams of protein. It's everything your parents wouldn't let you eat when you were younger, covered in chocolate in a protein bar. It's awesome. Okay, they're healthy, they're tasty, and they're made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently, provides tons of health benefits. Go to built.com right now. Get yourself a box of cookie dough chunk puffs. Use promo code LOCKED15, get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. There's a gentleman that I'm trying to get on the podcast, Doug Farrar, okay, touchdownwire.com. He's had some interesting things to say about the Arizona Cardinals. He's had his list season, having Budda Baker out of the top 13 safeties, honorable mentioned. And then it's interesting that you bring this up, LO15. He had some interesting numbers about pre-snap movement motion from the wide receivers. And when Kliff Kingsbury uses pre-snap motion, the efficiency level skyrockets. But I think they were 27th last year. It was either 27th last year or 2 years ago in pre-snap movement. So it's kind of like, oh, you find something that works, do it more. Hopefully that's another thing that we'll see Kliff Kingsbury do in 2022, moving around his vast group of skill position players on the offensive side of the ball. Antonio Hamilton is making waves. This is a guy who when the offseason started, it's like, okay, this is who we're looking at for corners in the cornerback room. Byron Murphy, Marco Wilson, Antonio Hamilton. That's not really something that you can be like, well, this cornerback room is going to strike fear into opposing offenses. And with the waves that he's making in camp, this is starting to formulate into a potential love affair story if he's going to start getting meaningful snaps during the season. And this is something that not only is a fun story, but it's something the Arizona Cardinals desperately need. They need cornerback depth. Sure, there are corners on the market. Joe Hayden's a name that's out there that Cardinals fans have been clamoring like, well, go get Joe Hayden. He's a guy that he will 100% add depth to this cornerback room. He'll add experience, and he'll be a guy that can be an impact maker in week one. Okay, if they were to sign him. But if you have a guy like Antonio Hamilton come in, make waves, and then actually produce come 2022, this is like what NFL dreams are made of. It's great storyline stuff. It's great fodder. It's great everything. And with Marco Wilson, being hobbled still, there's still not a surefire spot for him as cornerback 2. Could be a fun storyline to follow. I've been going back and forth with camp, and I know, and it's partially my fault that I haven't talked a whole lot about what's going on in camp day in and day out. And it's my job to kind of give a little insight. I'm not out there every day, but I read a lot, I watch a lot, I pay attention a lot, and I've seen more storylines about players that are already solidified as starters than storylines like Antonio Hamilton, storylines like Andy Isabella, where Andy Isabella, according to reports, has flashed a couple times in camp. He's going to be one of the starting wide receivers in their preseason game against Cincinnati on Friday. The depth chart just came out, and The starting wide receivers, Trace McSorley is going to be starting. The third stringer is going to be starting. So Colt McCoy will not be. Greg Dortch, Andy Isabella are going to be the wide receivers. Josh Miles and Josh Jones are going to be the starting tackles. Sean Harlow is going to be the starting center. Eno Benjamin, depth chart, is going to be starting at running back. I'm sure you'll see you'll see some more running backs in there. I'm sure you'll see Keontae Ingram in there as well. But through camp so far, the emergence of somebody like, didn't see that coming. I think Antonio Hamilton's one of those stories. Greg Dortch has burned a couple corners that we've seen, but it's not like, okay, this is the first round pick the Cardinals have. This is the second round pick the Cardinals have. And there's expected to be difference makers in completely different ways. They didn't have a first round pick. They tried for Hollywood Brown. Trey McBride has been hobbled a little bit. We've seen that he and Kyler Murray have had pretty good cohesion early on. But it's pretty clear that the Cardinals know who they're rolling with. And then if Antonio Hamilton can step in, if he moves into the CB2 role, that would be more of an indictment on Marco Wilson than the emergence of Antonio Hamilton. All in all, through camp still, it seems like, as I mentioned yesterday on the podcast, check it out, free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, that Steve Keim had a plan. He implemented his plan pretty much to perfection. It was load up the offense, trust Zaven Collins and Isaiah Simmons, trust Byron Murphy, and have Marcus Golden be their lead edge rusher. Drafted two edge, hand of the dirt guys, Cam Thomas and Majai Sanders in the third round, but it was load up the offense, and that's what they've done. And it seems like through camp so far, everything is pretty much as you expected. Trey McBride's going to be tight end 2, unless Zach Ertz gets hurt. Rondale Moore's really going to have to flash. And hopefully when DeAndre Hopkins comes back, he can stay healthy throughout the course of the 2022 season. And Hollywood Brown can emerge as a wide receiver 1 or 1A throughout the season. That's pretty much what we're looking at right now. What should we be watching for during Friday's first preseason game against the Bengals? I'm going to talk about that very lightly, and I'll talk about it a little bit more as the week goes on. Alex Clancy, Locked On Cardinals. A little early preseason game week 1 preview. Next, Locked On Cardinals. First, Dave, okay? We've all been in a situation at some point where you need a little extra cash, need a little extra cheese. You got bills piling up, and one came in, you're like, oh man, I didn't account for that. I could really use a little extra money right now. If you're living paycheck to paycheck or struggling to make ends meet, it can be really stressful when unexpected expenses come up. Now Dave can help you get out of a pinch when you really need it. Hindsight's 2020, and you can't change the past. But what if you could get a little help from your future self? Maybe you'd ask to borrow a little cash. Now you can with Dave. Dave's the banking app that helps you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. There's more money to fill your tank, buy a wedding gift, or catch up on bills. You can finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hangups. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch and need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's DAVE. Sign up for extra cash, get an account, and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve, member FDIC. Thanks for hanging out with me on a Tuesday live here on Twitter and YouTube. Locked On Cardinals. It's just, I wish that I found this year's camp to be more exciting than the offseason leading up to it. It's like the Cardinals had their fill of storylines and offseason stuff. Sure, you're going to see Kyler Murray throw some bombs in training camp. Pads are on. He's back from COVID. Hollywood Brown is back from his injury. This is where it's cool. There's a game in 3 days, and the Cardinals aren't going to play any of their big guys, at least depth chart-wise. It's going to be a bunch of guys trying to make the squad as opposed to players who are already playing. I'm most excited. If there's one thing to talk about, sure, I'd like to see Greg Dortch play. Like, we've heard his name in camp, mainly a practice squad guy. Like, he's really fast. And if he comes out and has a deep touchdown, it'll be fun to watch, okay? But what I'm most interested in seeing from 1 to 22, the starters that come out and play against the Bengals on Friday, is Josh Jones at right tackle. He's been playing out of position. He's not a guard. He's a tackle. And I don't think people expected, maybe people did, but I didn't necessarily expect Kelvin Beachum just to come in and be the bookend. He's the bookend to DJ Humphries. One of the best signings that Steve Keim has made. And he's come in and he's been an above average right tackle ever since he's come in. And Josh Jones has had to play guard, which he's played a little bit of, but that's not his natural position. So we may be looking at a situation where Josh Jones just may be on the shelf for another year. And depending on what they do with Kelvin Beachum after 2022. I don't know. Like, this is a situation where Kelvin Beachum is a better right tackle than Josh Jones right now. That's why Josh Jones isn't getting the playing time at right tackle. And I want to see what he can do. Like, these are reps that I want to see. Andy Isabella, aside from his 3 touchdowns in 2 games to start the 2020 season, I think it was week 2 and week 3. My memory serves me right. He had 3 touchdowns in 2 games. Then the clamoring of, dynasty leagues, draft Andy Isabella, fantasy sleeper, blah, blah, and then it kind of went off a cliff. We know what Andy Isabella is. Greg Dortch, fun to watch. Josh Jones, I want to see. Because if you can't protect Kyler Murray, none of this is going to work. And if heaven forbid something happens to Kelvin Beachum or, anybody getting injured for that matter, if Josh Jones can step in and be a young right tackle for this roster moving forward, that is a win after a 3rd-round pick that the Cardinals used on him a couple years ago. And really quick, because I'm almost getting out of here. I wasn't going to talk about this, but I will. The Roquan Smith thing, okay. I tweeted out, like, Roquan Smith requested a trade. He's an inside linebacker. Like, should the Cardinals trade for him? He's looked at as, like, not a high-impact position inside linebacker compared to some others. But it's like, it'd be kind of a do-over. But they already, they're just stockpiling inside linebackers right now. So I don't see it. Would he be a level up from what the Cardinals have now? Yeah, for sure. But unless you're going to move Zaven Collins or Isaiah Simmons to a different position, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Roquan Smith is an absolute mauler. And the fact that the Bears haven't given him money yet blows my mind. But I just don't see a fit for the Cardinals. I would have if the drafting would have gone a little different in 2020 or 2021. But as we sit now, we're rolling with what the Cardinals have on defense, it seems. Hopefully they'll add a couple veteran pieces from the edge rush and cornerback position before the 2022 season starts. It's getting ever closer. We're less than a month away from kickoff. It's going to be fun. Alex Clancy, Locked On Cardinals. Thanks for hanging. I'll talk to you tomorrow.